Hello everyone, so thank you for coming, thanks for joining us. Should we need to get our slides up first, do we? Yes, we do. Thanks Josh, you didn't give us our slides.
And he's hiding at the back.
He's hiding, he's gone in hiding. Yeah.
Where are they?
I think we minimise that. Technical difficulties.
Which is ironic, really.
Yay, okay. Right, so hello, welcome, thanks for coming. We I guess wanted to share our experiences of working with a team at Cancer Research UK. I guess this story happened over a 4-month period, roughly. I'm no longer at Cancer Research UK, but just to clarify, but Connie is still there. What we wanted to do was just share our experience of how we worked with the team, and just, things that worked, lessons we learnt, what kind of experience we had along the way. We're trying to be open and honest about what our experience was. We want to communicate what's important, obviously. So to do that, the way we're going to structure this talk is we've kind of picked out 5 key areas or challenges that we think are important to showcase. But before that, we'll go through some of the context, how this all happened, where were we, and then we'll be sharing the learnings for those challenges that we went through, tools and techniques as well that maybe we tried, worked, didn't work perhaps. And then obviously there'll be some Q&A at the end as well. So take it away.
So first of all, just wanted to spend some time setting out why things need to change, because the context in which we're working is changing all of the time and quickly, so we need to be able to adapt to change. And that was something that the business owner, and I'm going to explain what a business owner is in a moment, and it's basically the person that we worked with, Arif and I and the rest of the team. She actually said that to us. And what she's talking about is the fact that customers and now in our case, supporters, are interacting with organisations in different ways. So their expectations are different, and essentially they're more demanding, and we need to be able to respond to them faster. And that is because of the age that we live in and the technology that we have access to. So a lot of the space that we're working in is something that we would call knowledge work, which is much more complex and much more ambiguous than work has been previously. For example, things from the industrial age or from the manufacturing context. So what works for that kind of work doesn't work for knowledge work anymore. So things like hierarchy and really detailed plans won't cut it anymore, because that's not how reality works, and we're not following those clear processes. So we need to get to a point where our leaders are able to say that they don't know, where we have empowered teams, we don't just have targets from the highest paid person in the room, and where we're really focused on outcomes and learning and what our users, customers, supporters' needs really are, not outputs and delivery for delivery's sake. That's not to say we shouldn't be delivering anything, because obviously we should. Obviously, I promise, but that's not our focus anymore. That's not the right place to start. So Arif and I went to a talk not long ago by Jeff Patton, who's like really big, important, great person in the Agile world, which I'm sure you've all heard of. And if you haven't, you should, because he's a very big, important person in the Agile world. What he said was that it's really easy to have lots of ideas and anyone can do that. The difficult thing is knowing which one's going to work, and basically you can't know that until you test it.
I think just to add to that briefly, I guess we see the world outside as things are changing all the time. Look at Toys R Us, look at Maplin's, very recent examples of organisations that fail to adapt to the reality of the market around them. I guess even organisations like Moo are disrupting as well. So the impetus is there, the need is there to change. Customers are working different. Customers want different things.
So what are we doing about it? At Cancer Research UK, we are responding to this need for change with a programme of digital transformation, which are two of the worst words I think that you could possibly say, because no one really understands what they mean anymore, and everyone has a different interpretation, and they're a bit like Agile sometimes, quite loaded. So we are doing something called the hub and spoke model, which probably makes just about as much sense if you don't explain it. And how it works is you've got your hub in the centre, which is full of your digital experts. So that's people that are experts in different practice areas like user experience, like content strategy, like search engine optimization, all that good stuff. You've also got your generalists in there, which is people like me, and also we have producers, which are like amazing support and play a huge role in this as well. And then you've got your products around that, also sitting in the hub. So at Cancer Research UK, we've got a number of digital products. So how this works is you've got that hub in the middle, and then from that you get spokes, and spokes are teams that get formed with people in the charity to solve a problem, test an idea, create an outcome, meet a user need. And what my role is to do is it's to bring together the experts in those different practice areas from the hub with the people who are experts in the subject matter, like volunteering or cancer information across the charity, and get those people working together. There's something else to say there. There's a really close relationship between me, I'm a proposition manager, and the business owner, and I'm going to go into a bit more detail on that as we go along in the talk. But my job is to really coach that person and help them change their ways of working and their team, so that ultimately what we're doing is getting to a point where everyone knows how to best meet their user, their supporters' needs, and they don't need people like me, they don't need spokes anymore, they can do this by themselves. And it's all about learning by doing, so we have to create a safe space in which teams are empowered to change the way that they work and have the space to be wrong about all those millions of ideas that they have, which they don't really stand a chance of being right about anyway. Oh, and I just added this definition of digital, which came from one of the government digital service people, because it just, applying the culture, processes, business models and technologies of the internet era to respond to people's raised expectations. When I spoke to my business owner about the fact that I was doing this presentation, I showed her that definition, and she was like, you should have just told me that at the start. But I didn't.
It wasn't as easy as that, if it was. I guess so. Yeah, who's the team? Who are we? This is something Connie put together. It was an activity we did in a retrospective once. So I think it was draw how the sprint went, and she felt it was a bit of a blur. And this is us, and that's Connie and myself. And apparently it was.
It's a reference. Yeah. It's a cultural pop reference, which I hope hasn't gone over your heads like it did with Arif. I was drawing an album cover. It was very clever. It was very inspired. Arif realised that last night when I told him when we were doing our final run through. So there you go.
That's about as embarrassing as we're going to get.
So hopefully. Yeah. So my role, proposition manager, what I need to do is partner with a team, partner with this business owner person, and bring along the skills from the hub so that we are testing an idea, solving their problem, meeting the outcome that they need, the user need, the supporter need that they're trying to help. So my role is to influence the culture of the team, create that safe space for change, embed ways of working, and basically just do whatever it takes to get that team in a position where they are equipped and able to put their users' needs first, and where they're in the right environment to be able to do that. The things I have to do range massively. So it goes from the more technical end of the spectrum, from setting up A/B tests, writing user stories, co-managing releases with Scrum Masters, to the sort of softer organisational psychology stuff, which is around influencing, leadership, coaching, and that's the bit that I'm really passionate about. What I wanted to say to this group of people is that because these roles are all about change, what's really important as well in all of this is resilience, and I think we'll talk a bit more about that as we go along, because it's important for us just as much as it's important. Maybe it's more important for us as people that are trying to make a change, and it's also important for the team that you're working in. And in the context of the spoke, I was looking for some support for understanding and addressing the challenges that our team were facing, and for someone to come in and challenge me and make me be better at my job and help me really embed that meaningful change that is sustainable and that will last. And that's where Arif comes in.
Still on that slide?
Oh.
Yeah, hello. So what was my role? So part of my main role at Cancer Research at the time was they have a team of agile delivery managers. So if you go back to that hub and spoke model we saw earlier, there are teams of agile delivery managers who look after product teams. So my main role was kind of coaching and supporting them as a group, but also going out and supporting individual projects and spokes like the one we're talking about today. And it was kind of in the Lisa Atkins mold of using the three hats of coaching, mentoring, teaching, identifying the right tool or the right approach depending on the situation. And I suppose for this particular spoke, given what Connie was just talking about, it was not so much to be focused on the mechanics of how we do Scrum and how we're using Scrum effectively, for example, in how we run and work with that team, but it was also to bring to bear other experiences. So, using lean principles, lean ideas, design thinking, and obviously wider agile techniques as well, and then shaping that experience and applying it in the right way to help the team with the kind of challenges they were facing. So, and again, it was supporting Connie. So I was really seeing Connie as the key change agent, working in that team, and my role to help support, coach, mentor, guide, facilitate, as whatever you'd like to call it, that her and the wider team as we go through this journey. I think going back, one other thing worth noting, and you may see this, is we kind of worked in a kind of boundary where we were sometimes doing things to a team, but we were on a journey of making them self-sufficient in that, so that we weren't necessarily doing things to them, but we were doing things with them, so they understood the reason for why we were addressing how they were working and why they needed to work in a different way. So I think you'll see some of that. There's bits of both in our experience that we're going to be sharing. Yep, cool.
So we'll stop talking about us and we'll start talking about the team that we were trying to work with and what that team were trying to do. So as we mentioned at the beginning, this is the story of a non-software development team. So that was our unique selling point for getting this slot. So what these guys were trying to do was design and manage a brand new volunteering program. And it was a particularly exciting one because they were trying to reach the sorts of people that Cancer Research UK doesn't normally reach. So it was about sharing cancer information in communities that have poorer cancer outcomes, which is so cool. What an exciting, amazing thing to get to be part of. And they were working in a really unfamiliar space. And they're such an open-minded and motivated team. And they had loads of assumptions, which they knew were assumptions. And that is not always the case when you start working with people with different teams. And a lot of people aren't used to thinking in terms of assumptions. So that was great. But it led to us making some assumptions about that team and who they were, because they're an innovation team and they were speaking a very familiar language. They were already standing up. They were saying that they had assumptions. They were championing user needs. So we made some assumptions about them and where they were on their sort of journey. I can't believe I just said that. Their journey of change, and I said it again. So we had some thoughts about them that we shouldn't have made so quickly.
I think it was partly what Connie said is a language thing as well. So they were talking and using the words and visually they were what we saw and how they were working felt to us that, oh right, okay, these guys kind of know this stuff already. We just need to go in there, fluff it a bit and refine it, and we'll be good, and we'll chivvy them along, and they'll go through the spoke successfully. And just on that point, many of you already know, in the manifesto, one of the principles talks about how to build teams around motivated individuals. And we definitely saw that. These guys are motivated. And so we thought, well, this is the perfect group of people to help build a team around solving this particular problem. So, yeah. So, yes. So what were our 5 key challenges and what did we learn from them? So we're going to hopefully go through step by step some of these challenges. I guess this is just how we felt it neatly summarized our work. So the first one.
Drum roll, please. Basically, what the team thought they were going to get when they enlisted the help of a digital team was pretty different to what the purpose of a spoke and what the purpose of working together actually is. So, like, picture it. You're a non-technology team, you're developing a volunteering experience, and you are enlisting the support of digital people to help you develop your user journey. The reason you're doing that is because, and the reason that the support needs to be digital is because what you want is an online user journey, and the reason you want it to be online is because if it's online, then it's scalable and it's cost effective. So they were looking for our support to help them build that journey and build that experience. There is a risky assumption there, because what if that audience that they're trying to get to aren't online? So what the team asked for was support with delivery, and what they got was disruption. And when we came into it, and as I started working with them, all I wanted to do was to work out what we could do in the spoke that would add the most value, and then ultimately leave the team in a position where they wouldn't need to have a spoke again. And that was just so far away from what they were expecting from us. And we've talked about this a lot, like during the spoke and as our relationships got stronger and since the spoke, because it's really hard to make people understand what that means, or help people understand what that means before they're actually in it. And I don't think we've cracked it yet, but we definitely learned a lot from this particular experience. And now Arif's going to talk us a bit more through how we got started.
Yeah, so typically when we work with a spoke, or when the proposition manager team start engaging with a spoke, one of the first things they look to do is build a vision. So if some of you are familiar with Roman Pitchler, he's got a nice tool he calls it vision board. So it's something along those lines. They have a vision board that it kind of articulates what's the purpose, why are we doing this, who are we doing this for, value generating, that kind of thing. But what we actually kind of felt, or what we kind of realized was, with this team, because of some of the stuff they were already doing, in terms of the way they were working and the kind of assumptions they'd already put together, and they had masses of output, lots of output. We felt, well, before we even get to that, I think we felt it would be useful to actually understand what it is they're actually doing. And what have they done so far? We needed some kind of alignment. Remember, we were merging 2 teams together. We've got the digital guys coming in with their expertise. We've got the business team coming in looking for support. So we're kind of creating a new team here. So it was important to get some alignment, understand and get that clarity. And so we were trying to do 2 things. Yeah, I guess understand what work they've done so far, get some alignment around that, but also visualize that work and just make it clear and transparent so we can all understand it, align ourselves against it. So how did we do that? So this is where we can get a bit funky. So we've got, sorry, that's in the bottom, but so we used some techniques from a book called Game Storming. So I found this nice quote from Dave Gray, the author, where he says, innovative teams need to navigate ambiguous, uncertain, and often complex information spaces. So we were definitely in that domain. And as Connie said at the start, they were also in that domain. They didn't really know who their users were, who their audience was. They didn't know how they were going to solve these problems. They had all these ideas. We didn't know how to help them. It was very complex, shall we say. So the reason we took game storming as a good metaphor for helping us is I just felt it's got some good approaches for how to structure conversations in groups. So how to collaborate in groups, how to run workshops in a way where you're kind of working your way through a challenge working your way through a domain in order to achieve some goal that you don't even know what that goal is, because it's going to emerge as you walk through the problem domain, essentially. So these are some nice pictures I just wanted to show. But the main thing is this, so the structure. So the whole thing around game solving is it uses, essentially it's a bit like design thinking. You open up and you do some, exploration, you set the context, you see where we are, what the current situation is, and then we do some exploration. So with that information, you explore that domain a bit more, you kind of categorize things, you do things like affinity mapping, you do things like grouping, you might break off into sub-teams and do some further analysis and understanding. And then the final stage of that is to actually come together and then synthesize all that into actionable work. So prioritize that work, create actions from it, determine next steps. And it's a good mechanism for working your way through these kind of situations that we felt we were in. We started with the intention of having one workshop. It turned into 2 workshops. So we kind of did this. So we kind of like went whoop, and then another one. So not 3, but 2. So, but the outcome of it was really useful, because we at the end of it got an understanding of who the audiences were, which audience we wanted to target for this cancer awareness that we were looking at, and also prioritizing and filtering all these assumptions into a kind of prioritized list, and understanding where the most value should be, where do we need to focus our attention on, and that kind of thing. So it gave us some sense of order into the work. I think that's all we're going to talk about here, isn't it? Yes.
What I wanted to mention on this point was that, so we came to this with like really the best intentions, and we just wanted to help, and we just wanted to know where it was that the spoke could make the most difference for the team. But in doing that, and in trying to make the team's work visible, we actually put our business owner in quite an uncomfortable position, because what it felt like was that we were asking them to start from scratch, and we were asking them to go right back to the beginning after they've been working on this, and tell us who your users are, tell us what your users' needs are and how you've got there. And it was an exercise in understanding, but it had an impact, an emotional impact on people in the team. And it meant that at the beginning we were going around in circles, because half the team are like, we need to deliver, we know this stuff, and now we've got you here to help us deliver this thing, so why are you still going on about this? Like, come on, let's go. And then on this side we're like, but we just want to help, we just want to understand what you've done, like. And then we'll know where the right thing is, what the right thing is to do next. And that was a lot of going round and a lot of difficult conversations. And I think the point on that is that we have to be adaptable too, and we have to have empathy. And I'm not going to say any more than that now, because we're going to talk a lot about empathy later. But I only really understood how uncomfortable it was for our business owner at the end of the spoke. And that was after we'd established this like really great, trusting, healthy relationship. So it's just something to be really aware of when you're going into a team and trying to help them, because that's all I felt, that's all we were trying to do, is help them. But like, how does that feel?
Have they not done some needs assessment which then
so they
created all of that so they could just go, here you are, as opposed to that?
Yes.
Being so difficult?
So they'd done a lot, for sure, and they'd got to a point where they had loads of insight.
Yep.
They kind of had, they had loads of insight and they had loads of ideas, and what we need to do was, structure that and understand what was an insight and what was an idea. And we did bring a bunch of other people from digital, and we knew nothing. The rest of the people from the hub didn't know anything about this work that they'd done. So it was also an exercise in like bringing those people in and getting everybody to a point where they understood. Does that, yeah?
Thank you. So we've got these 2, a couple of workshops out of the way. We've got to some point where we've got some alignment. What do we do next? So, we've got the work kind of identified to a degree, but what about the team? What about, remember we've still got these 2 teams kind of forming and coming together, right? So how do we account for that? So this is the idea which we wanted to thread into this talk, is the idea of psychological safety and building high-performing teams. So, this is a really important, I guess, thing to be aware of for us in terms of how, it felt that, just bringing these people together in a room and just saying, right, let's do this, isn't enough. We need to do something and need to appreciate that we're not, currently formed together in the right way. So where does this come from? So I've got a link here. When we share this out, I'm sure you can have a look if you haven't already. But there's an article around Google's quest, as they called it, in building the perfect team. And there's a nice story about how they went through an exercise of actually understanding what a high-performing team looks like. And what they essentially did was had this, they call it Project Aristotle. It was what it was about. They ran this project for a year. It covered over 100 teams, and they were just endlessly number crunching and analyzing what is it about all our teams that make them good, or in vice versa, not good, and what are the things that we need to be accounting for, looking out for, to make sure we have a really good high performing team, and what is that secret ingredient. And they came across some traits, and they looked at some of this stuff and they realized that there was stuff around team norms and how teams actually kind of self-create their own expectations of what how they want to work with each other, and that led them to something called psychological safety. And how they defined it is, well, a known psychologist, a well-known psychologist, Amy Edmondson. She defines it as a team that will not embarrass, reject, or punish someone for speaking up. So when you've got those kind of traits happening in a team, then you've got psychological safety in effect, and that is the building block for starting to create trust in a team as well. So the two are very closely linked. And this is something that I was actively thinking about in terms of how we wanted to create this right environment. So how did we actually do that? So blank slide, we didn't do anything. But, so how did we do that? So anyone seen that? I guess most of you kind of seen something like that. So this is Simon Sinek's model. He calls it the golden circle. We'll start with why is the, I think, name of the talk. It's quite famous. A lot of people have seen it now. So I used that as a metaphor. In this metaphor, in how he described it, his whole thing is that, look, people don't buy into what you do or how you're providing something or what you're selling. They're buying into why you do it. They're buying into that purpose. They're buying into that core belief that you have. That is the real essence for how people buy into your offering. So I thought that's a really nice metaphor for what we're trying to do. We're trying to create a team. We don't have a clear vision. We have some idea of the work. We know kind of what we're doing, but we don't have the vision. We don't have a core belief. We don't have a purpose. So I used this metaphor, and we did this in a workshop format, so we collaboratively did this. And the first thing we did was, so I kind of mapped it across. So the why eventually turned into our vision. So this was our purpose, our core belief. The what was, what are the values and principles that we need as a team in order to kind of build or demonstrate that vision. So what is it important to us as a team? What values and principles do we hold dear or are important to us that are really the foundation for this team? And then the last ring, the how, that is where we can start talking about some of those norms that we mentioned. So some of those behaviors and practices. So practically, what are the kind of things we're going to be doing? So how are we going to interact with each other? What are those ways of workings that we want to agree on? Because all of this should link back to our vision, right? So we need to be able to thread that through. So I guess this metaphor gave us the two things. So the vision statement, so that's a vision statement that the team came up with. So this is their vision statement. We collaboratively worked through this. We had an exercise, the usual sticky notes and Sharpies, I guess, if you want to call it that. But yeah, so they collaboratively formed the vision statement. And then from the what and the how, they formed a team charter. So that was the outcome we were looking for. A team charter is a nice, useful technique for starting to build that trust and psychological safety in the team. And just a bit of credit to Adventures with Agile, because I took some inspiration from there. They've got a Team Genesis pack where I think they've got some ideas of how to start off with a team from scratch, and they've got some ideas on a team charter. So I took that from them. So you can see here on the left hand side we've got values and principles. On the right hand side we've got some behaviors that they agreed on. At that point we hadn't got a name agreed or a motto, but yeah, don't worry about that. Sorry, there was a question somewhere here.
What does spoke mean? Because in different organizations, the word spoke is quite different. Are you just using the word spoke means for speaking, or is it like referred to a particular role?
The spoke is what we were talking about earlier. So this is the structure of how we work, or how Cancer Research UK works.
It's basically a project.
It's a project, essentially, yeah, for a limited time box.
It's, yeah.
Great. So, so this is how we started. So this was a workshop we were doing, and this is how we started to create that kind of, as you were saying earlier, trust in that team. One of the other things that we tried to do as a different kind of technique was a game called Strong Suits. Strong Suits is something I came across around that time when we were with this team, and it's a really good technique for we found for building empathy and trust. So what the guys, you can see the team here, this is our lovely team there. So they're playing, it's a card game, it is a card game, but there's a substance to it. So in the deck of cards, you have strengths. So each card in the deck represents a strength that you may or may not feel that you possess. So I think things like responsible. I'm a big picture person, or I'm a person who has a vision. There's a whole bunch of them. I can't remember off the top of my head. But the idea with the exercise that we were running was to actually start building up a profile of all the team members and looking at what kind of strengths as a team member do I bring to the team, and how do they complement my fellow team members. So it was a nice way of starting to create that understanding within the team, that trust within the team, and also learning about each other. Again, learning about each other and knowing sometimes personal, to a degree this was personal, but personal traits about each other all help to contribute towards that psychological safety and trust we were building. So yeah, there's references in this deck at the end, but I would recommend checking that out. We can answer any questions about it later maybe. So
wait a sec. It was also really useful because we're bringing together these digital skills that a lot of people won't have heard of before, especially when you're bringing a team together in that way. So it's another very sort of practical, real way of illustrating what kind of skills these people might expect to take on as a result of having been through this experience with us. And setting the vision together, and setting our team charter, all these things, they allowed us to move forward to a point where we could start talking about what it was that we needed to learn, not just what we wanted to deliver. And that was not the end of that conversation, but it was a big step and a big turning point in allowing that to happen and starting that shift. So I guess the point is that psychological safety isn't there at the start. So at the beginning, not everyone in the team feels like they can be really honest. And just be really, when you're going into a team and trying to create change, be really aware of that and try to coach people through it, and just know and be comfortable with the fact that it is going to be hard, and it will be hard for everyone. And even, as I've said already, even when you come with the very best intentions, you can still get things wrong, just on the basis that you don't know each other yet. So this is all part of that, building those great relationships and really getting to know each other. Which, funnily enough, brings us on nicely to the next slide, which is two more of our sort of key things we learned, key things that were difficult, which we just couldn't really separate out from each other. So cultivating trust takes time, and you can't make massive wholesale changes overnight. So to the cultivating trust point, after we'd set up we'd agreed our vision and we'd had our team charter, we felt like we were in a place where we would be set up for success and the team might be more receptive to change. But there was much more to do after that point, and this work is never a straight line forward. You're going to go... The team was so engaged and so willing to learn and get involved, and we were getting really great outcomes from our session. But we're working with people, and people learning and people coping with change. You're going to move backwards and forwards all the time. And again, it leads on nicely. It's like we planned this presentation. What did we learn about? What did we learn about making change? So, for example, we introduced the concepts of Scrum quite loosely. And the reason we did that is because if you just force a load of processes and a load of ways of working on people, they become just a load of processes and just a load of ways of working, and they don't have any meaning, and it can be really overwhelming. So what we did in this instance was we started with ceremonies and artifacts of Scrum, and we weren't really explicit about roles. So we weren't saying, you are now a cross-functioning team, you are now a product owner. We just were really working at their pace and introducing things sort of one at a time and more gradually, so that we didn't frighten them off with our, all these loaded words that we are so used to saying. And in terms of like us as people that are trying to create change, don't be disheartened when it doesn't all change and when things go backwards, because that's a really normal part of the process, and you feel that on both sides, and that is okay.
Great, cool. So Connie's raised some really good points there, and so why do we think that's happening? What's going on here? So this again, I'm sure many of you are familiar with this. So Tuckman's model for team and group development. This is really a nice way of capturing what we've just been talking about, which is, so remember, we're at this point where we've just started this formation of this team. We've started understanding and figuring out how we're going to work with each other. We've started to learn about who each other are in the team, our strengths, what we bring to the table, all of that good stuff. And then it's like, okay, now let's go. And we do start sprinting and we start working, and then it's like we're realizing that, oh, actually, I'm not feeling comfortable at how we're working like this, and I don't really like this, and I don't really like working with you, and all this stuff starts coming out, right? So we start seeing things like, challenging authority, boundaries being pushed, conflicts start happening, all of this stuff, and that's because we're going towards this point of storming. So the team are in this phase of storming now. So they've formed, yeah, we've got the formation happening, but now we're starting to really understand how we're going to work with each other. And that's really where, when we started observing these behaviors, it also led us to understanding of this model as well. So another model for you, chucking models at you. 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, really good book, Patrick Leccioni, if I've got that right. Highly recommend it. Again, it's in our references. And what he talks about is that essentially when we talked about the high performance on the other end of the scale of psychological safety, trust, etc., on the other, the flip side of that is a dysfunctional team displays the opposite, and they'll display some of these traits from 1 all the way to 5. So the root cause is always the absence of trust, but they'll be manifesting themselves in different ways. So inattention to results, avoidance of accountability, lack of commitment. They're pretty harsh when you read them like that, but they're not as harsh, So it's just, we recognized there was a challenge. We recognized there were gaps here. We recognized that we were in this storming phase. We were seeing some of the behaviors here. So how did we address that? And that was Connie and I discussing, saying, what are we going to do? I said, well, look, this is why we're doing Scrum. We've got a retrospective as a ceremony. That's a perfect occasion to actually address some of this stuff. And we, I think one of the first retrospectives, I can't remember, we ran an exercise. Again, I think it's in the pack Adventures of Agile I've put together, Team Genesis. They've got a pack there where they've got a really nice exercise for how to communicate the idea of the 5 dysfunctions to a team. And it's a really interactive exercise. So you basically go through example behaviors and example scenarios, and the exercise with the team is to try and pick out whether any of those are things they've seen before, or whether they have any affinity to them. Do they feel that they've mapped to any of the experiences they've had in their team? So that's the kind of discussion. So it was very interesting. A lot of open questions, obviously, a lot of powerful questions, and asking why and what happened, trying to get into the real detail of what was going on. And through that conversation, we started to actually understand, what the problems were, and that, yes, a lot of them did boil down to there was not enough trust in the team. That still hadn't been formed sufficiently enough. But what was really positive in that retrospective that we ran was we started to see some real ownership of how we're going to solve it. So the guys were like, you know what, yeah, we've seen that, we recognize that, we're going to deal with it, this is what we're going to do, we're going to do X, Y, Z action to kind of overcome these challenges. So there was acceptance, there was recognition, and there was ownership of the solution. So that was really positive in some respects.
What I wanted to say here is that when Arif suggested this to me, I was like, absolutely not. I am not going into a team and say, like, we can't go and tell them that there's no trust here. Like, these guys, they've been working together for ages. Like, no, I do not want to do that. I'm so uncomfortable. I can't do that. And then I thought, oh, but we're supposed to do things that make us uncomfortable, aren't we? And I'm actually making these people uncomfortable by working with them at the moment, and they're probably feeling really uncomfortable because they're going through all this stuff. So the moral of the story is you have to do things that make you uncomfortable too. And then we had the conversation, and it was really great, and I don't think any of them found it uncomfortable at all. So I was worrying all about nothing for a change. So this was a real turning point for the team, and the business owner said that. I didn't just say that, well I did, but she said it first. And these trust issues had come from the fact that the teams had differing points of view, and they were frustrated because they didn't know the way forward. And this really honest, open conversation just helped everyone to understand each other. And I still feel uncomfortable with it now, but like, when you find something like that, that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. It can still definitely be the right thing to do. The other last point on this is that this is an example of where we did something to the team. We didn't do something with the team. Ultimately, you're trying to get to a point where the team can do all these kinds of things for themselves, and they don't need us anymore. They don't need me anymore. But you've got to start somewhere, and this was where one of our starting points.
Cool. So we mentioned retros, and I just thought it'd be nice to just build on that a bit. And I just wanted to emphasize the fact that retrospectives as a technique are extremely powerful mechanisms for inspecting and adapting your ways of working. And the other thing, the really key thing for me was it's the idea of continuous improvement. So going back to this whole idea of creating change and creating that environment for change, and that wholesale, the idea of creating wholesale massive change, that doesn't work. It would have created a great degree of disruption that was unnecessary, and what we were looking for was the entire opposite, which is incremental evolutionary change, which is the idea of Kaizen, as many of you know as well. I found this picture was a nice way of representing retrospect. So I'm guessing a lot of you are familiar with Esther Darby, Diana Larson have a really nice book on agile retrospectives. They talk about this idea of 5 stages of a retrospective, and again it fits very neatly to what we were doing earlier with the game storming and the design thinking, which is the idea of you opening up, you're listening, you're taking in input, you're exploring, you're ideating, you're filtering through, and then you're closing and getting some actions. And I would recommend, again, if you haven't heard of it, a very good book to read, a very good structure to follow when running retrospectives. And I guess here's some examples of us doing some retrospectives. What I wanted to just put, playing with Lego, of course. But no, the idea I wanted to just pick out here, I found metaphors are a really powerful technique in retrospectives. So Lego as a metaphor, in this case, we were drawing and having an idea of a sailboat in another metaphor. I can't remember, we did other things as well. But the reason I wanted to pull that out was metaphors for me, I found where teams maybe struggle or it can be difficult to kind of pinpoint problems and relate to the problems that they're facing. Metaphors are useful because it's a form of disassociation in a way. You can disassociate yourself out of it and think of it in another dimension, but still get to the same outcome. So I would recommend thinking about metaphors when you're planning or looking at retrospectives as a tool, because it really did work for us. And yeah, as I said earlier, just the idea of Kaizen. This is what we're doing with continuous evolutionary, continuous improvement through evolutionary incremental change. I think that was it on this one. And the next challenge? So
that brings us on to our fourth out of 5 of our key challenges. So throughout all this experience and all of this stuff and all of these activities, there was a real feeling from the business and from some senior stakeholders that this is slowing us down and distracting us from delivery. And I think this speaks to that point that we started to address that at the beginning, but it took time to get to a point where it stopped being such a theme. So what was really important, sorry, hello?
Sorry to interrupt, but did you just get that feedback from stakeholders in that case? Like, for example, I have experience that I get that feedback a lot from my own team.
From your own team?
Say, you know what, those solo ceremonies and I'm wasting an hour here doing what is not reposted and I could be actually reporting. So, did you get that?
It's mixed. So so when we start, my experience of working with people who haven't remotely worked in this kind of way before, when you sort of suggest the idea of a retro and what it's for, and then you get them to play a game of Lego, you can sometimes, there's some skepticism there and unwillingness sometimes to engage. It wasn't really a problem that we had with this team. But there was mixed attitudes in the team to doing this stuff, which was why we were having these conversations in the background. And we were going to talk about some coaching type stuff that we did to sort of open up those conversations and help people see the value in what does this do and why does this make things better. The other thing is that we're not like purist on anything, so we got ourselves in a position where we were adapting and changing what we were doing so that we could show that we were listening to the team, and where there wasn't value we weren't going to force it if it wasn't working and if it didn't need to happen. Does that help? Does that answer the question? I don't know.
We can talk a bit more in the Q&A as well, perhaps. Yeah. Cool.
So it's a common problem that many of us have faced. So I guess the key thing for us here was about understanding why people feel this way and having empathy for them and really getting in their shoes. So when you're creating space for change, you also need to be creating space for honesty and openness and transparency and being really explicit. So what we did was we worked together, and particularly me and the business owner, we worked really closely together to expose what the challenges were. That was through retros and workshops as well. For example, why is delivery so important? Like, obviously delivery is important, but like, why do we keep coming back to this? Like, what's the difficulty here? So
I think sometimes it's just what people may be saying as they think the problem is actually a manifestation of something else. So it's actually a symptom of something. So it's really important to actually ask the right questions to understand what the actual issue is. So when people, going back to your point around, yeah, it's a waste of my time, I'm just being here. Actually, what maybe the problem could be is, you know what, I'm just not getting enough time to myself to do my work. And I'm just taking it out, my frustration on the fact that I have to attend these ceremonies, but actually there are other things that are going on and I can't express that because I'm not in a position to, I don't feel safe enough or whatever. So it's, I think that's some of the challenges. So we'll go into a bit of that and maybe we can...
I think it can be that you don't feel safe enough or you don't even know, like you don't even know how to articulate it, and that's a big part of coaching as well, and helping get to the bottom of that stuff. So for us, for this, what the question was how do you create the time and space for a team to be disrupted and to go through this change when they're supposed to be delivering, when they've got targets around them, when there's expectations, when they've got budget, when they've made certain commitments? Like, how do you get to a point where the team have space to do this stuff? So something that we tried was replaying behaviours back to the team and replaying what the impacts that those behaviours were having were. And really key thing about that is that you have to be really objective and don't make any assumptions and don't make it, it's not an emotional thing and it's not about blame. It's literally just sort of holding up a mirror and saying, this is what's happening and this is the impact that it's having. The other thing is that when people are under pressure, they revert to habit. So when things are tough and when things are difficult, they will go back to what they used to do before because that's what they knew. So I'm just going to run through a couple of examples of the sorts of behaviours that we observed and the impact that they were having. How we handled it was a lot of one-to-one conversations, a lot of open questions, active listening, and like I said, just having those conversations without any judgment, without any assumptions, because it's the team that have to own the change. Like, there's no point me going, you're doing this wrong and it's bad, because that's not going to help anybody. So, are they on there? So, we had a lot of things every day when we stood up and did our stand-up. We had a lot of things in progress, and there was always a real urgency around the tasks that needed doing. And what this led to was the team context switching, which meant they were doing different things all the time and work was only getting partially done. It also meant that the tasks were not moving across our board, which is bad not only for team morale, but it's also bad for getting stuff done because we are also trying to do things and move forward. A second behaviour we saw was changing priorities. So our sprint goals were changing without the whole team being brought into that, and things weren't being finished. The impact of that is that the team weren't clear on what the value of their work the team weren't clear on what the value of their work was. And then our last one was the last example was stories being added to the sprint backlog during the sprint, which led to the team feeling really overwhelmed and not knowing where to start. And again, tasks weren't progressing. So what we're going to talk about now is a bit more detail about that coaching and what that looked like.
Yeah, so I guess what Connie was talking about earlier, about how we address some of that, is I was kind of in the background with this because I wanted to help Connie and grow her in how she could handle these challenges without me taking that role on, because that was the whole idea. We had deliberately discussed this right from the beginning that, I'm going to be coaching you through this, I'm going to be helping, supporting you. So we took a bit of the GROW model as a metaphor, not metaphor, as a technique for how I worked with Connie through this. So looking at, okay, what is the current situation? What is the reality we're in? What are we trying to get to? What's the goal? So the goal was to obviously improve the team and to remove these dysfunctional behaviours. And what options do we have? There are many ways we could handle it. Obviously, the approach that we chose was what Connie mentioned, is having the open, reflective conversation back. So using the open questioning, reflecting back, acting as the mirror, having one-to-ones, using a very objective view of what is the behaviour, what is the impact. Those are kind of the options that we took on. And obviously there was a desire, there was a willingness that was already established. So it was, getting to that point by asking Connie open questions as well about how do you feel we could best approach this challenge? What options do we have? What's the best way to do this? What could be the impact if you do it this way? Are there any other techniques we could try? That was the kind of approach we took. The other thing I just wanted to flash up was, it's funny because this is the last time where I learned this was in this same room. So Lisa Atkins was here, I can't remember, over a year ago or so, and she went through this model of the traits of an agile coach, and she calls it an X-wing model, and there are multifacets to what an agile coach is. So there's the mentoring, the teaching, the core experience in agile lean practices, but also there's elements of facilitation and professional coaching. And I'm not going to profess to say I have any depth of experience in everything, but I have some in some areas. So, taking some of that and not maybe pure professional coaching, but some elements of coaching to help support Connie. If you want to learn more about this, then her book on coaching agile teams is awesome, so check that out. There's a lot of good information in there around how you wear these three hats of coaching, teaching, mentoring, and maybe we can go through in more detail in Q&A if people want to understand a bit more. But that was the kind of techniques, and that was the kind of technique I was using. That was the approach we took, and it helped Connie get to a place where she was able to handle those challenges herself independently. Then we obviously review back in our one-to-ones, catch up and see, well, how's it going? What's worked? What's not worked? What do we need to change? What should we try next? And that was the kind of approach we were taking.
And we did agree that explicitly at the beginning, but you still forget, like, and I didn't realise I was like having the grow model applied to me. So, you know, so like that helps me have a bit of empathy for what we're doing to people when we're doing this stuff. Because even if you have said yes, I would like to be coached. You're not necessarily thinking of this, are you? So, just something to run through quickly, something that became an issue as we progressed, because your issues changed as you move along in your experience. I'm just trying so hard not to say journey again. So, we had an issue. Something started to happen where there was not clarity on, oh, have I given it away? Yeah. Sorry. Okay. There was not clarity on what the roles were and who should be making the decisions. So we had trust forming, but that ambiguity was still there. And there's always is going to be ambiguity there because you're only ever just chipping away at it. But anyway, so what was happening was that the team felt quite empowered, and they felt empowered some of the time, but they didn't feel empowered all of the time, and they didn't know when they were supposed to be feeling empowered and not. So, and then on the other side, there's the business manager and leaders, and people like me as well, who are really just trying to help and offer feedback and support wherever we can. And what this did was it led to confusion about whose responsibility is what. So what we needed to do was to help provide clarity so that there was accountability and so that everybody knew where they stood. So how did we do that?
How did we do that? Right, so now we can give it away.
Now we can look at it.
So we played, so we took a tool from there's a toolbox of things that Management 3.0 provide. So if anyone's familiar with Management 3, this is really freaking me out. Management 3.0 provide a whole host of really cool tools and techniques. And one of the ones that we took, or we used, was something called delegation poker. The idea here is that the core concept behind it is that there are 7 levels of delegation. They range from no delegation, which is pure command and control. So I am the manager. I will tell you as the person in my team what I want you to do, and I will designate the work to you, and you will do as I say, effectively. To the other extreme, which is number 7, which is full delegation. So I, as a manager, I have no say in the matter. I'm fully delegating the authority to make the decision to you as a team member. And I trust you completely explicit in how you make that decision. So it's all about where are we on that spectrum in terms of decision making for all these challenges, all these kind of activities that we're doing as a team. So it really helped us with clarifying and being explicit around, as the business owner, they were proxying for the product owner role in a way. They were taking on that product owner role in this team. So clarifying once again what that meant and actually really enacting that. And as a team, as the people in that business owner's team, what does the responsibilities lie for them in terms of the work they need to do and how they're going to do it. So you can see on the left-hand side here, we've got all the activities that we discussed. And it was nice, actually, at the end of it, that most of the levels of delegation that we agreed were on the higher end of the scale, so 4 to 7. So this, I can't remember all of them, but this is more around consultative. So, they would make decisions together with the business owner, or full delegation. I think there was something here that was fully delegated to the team, which was great. And some of the others, which was, well, I will inquire after you've made the decision. So that was another, it's on that spectrum of the level of delegation that they wanted to agree. And this is them playing the game, so you can see cards there. So it's a poker game, essentially. You have a stack of cards, 7 delegation cards. We threw out the activity on the table, had a discussion. We'd call out 1, 2, 3, and they'd chuck a card. And if you think about it, to do that type of exercise requires a degree of trust and safety in the team. It's not something you want to be doing, from day one, because it can be it can be very sensitive, because we've got a manager in the room who may not feel very comfortable talking about that kind of stuff and is not in a position to let go of, her authority or her decision making to her team. We had to time this, and we had to find the right opportunity to do this. And it was further down the line when we were in a position where we were having good open conversations where we proposed this and the team were like, yes, let's do it. This is really helpful. We're going to try it. And it worked, and we got that up there, and I think it really improved things going forwards. Is that right?
Yeah.
Cool. So next one?
Yeah.
The last one?
So
Our last challenge?
we'll go through this quite quickly because we're nearly at an hour. So we've literally nearly been speaking for an hour, which is a really long time. So this was our last big challenge, and it was that the target that we had and the target that the team became fixated on didn't help us to be outcome-led, and it made prioritisation really difficult. So the context of this is that what we're trying to do is get a balance between delivery and between learning. And the team was too delivery focused at the beginning, and what was happening was this target was driving decisions, it wasn't driving space to learn. And what happened was that the target became scary and everyone fixated on it, because it also, the target that everyone got interested in wasn't the only thing that we were trying to do, and it wasn't the only outcome that there was. And the fact that it got fixated on made it really difficult to prioritise. So what we did was we took a step back and we thought about it, and we broke it down into what that target represented. So for us, it was to recruit a certain amount of volunteers, and what it meant was, is this thing that we're building scalable? Is this experience something that a lot of people want to do? And is it something that we can manage ourselves? Can we look after it in-house? So by taking that step back and opening it up to the team, our goal and our ultimate outcome and objective became a lot clearer, and it became shared, and it became much more about what the impact of the volunteering scheme was supposed to do. And then the other role that I played there was helping the business owner and the team to tell that story and get buy-in from people around us and stakeholders who weren't immediately part of that conversation.
So yeah, I think the key learning in that kind of with this challenge was that becoming outcome-led really helps with alignment in a team. It can really help towards that challenges around motivation as well, because if we go back to what we were talking about earlier around that vision, that core purpose, if all your work subsequently and the way the work is defined aligns back to that vision, that core purpose, and there's a clear breakdown of the work, and you can articulate it that yes, this particular task gives us this particular value, it's going to generate this for our user, and it definitely relates to our vision, it makes engagement much easier with the team. So that was something that we really wanted to bring out and highlight, and it helps with the team understanding their purpose as well, because obviously they know now, I know why we're doing this, it's aligning ourselves to the vision, we're going to add value, it's not just something arbitrary. The other thing is kind of what we were talking about earlier, this was a sensitive topic. This was challenging this particular target was very difficult. It wasn't something we would have been able to do at the beginning. If we had done that again, we would have created huge barriers of resistance to change. We could only have done this at a point where the team were ready and comfortable. We'd got them into a place where there was safety and trust between us, where we could start having these kind of very challenging conversations. So the learning there, or the message there is, you've got to start from where the team are. So, meet them where they are, understand where they are, have empathy to their position, but also you've got to work to their pace. So if you've got this J-curve of change, we're not creating a massive dip, we're making small incremental changes all the way through. And this was one of them. So it felt like just another conversation. It was at the right time, we're working at their pace. And the other thing was Kaizen and the opposite of that. So this is something I learned from Dan Brown, really nice way of putting it. So Kaizen over Kaikaku. So Kaikaku apparently is the opposite in Japanese, which is revolutionary change. We definitely didn't want revolutionary change. We wanted Kaizen, which is incremental change. And this was something around that, which is a small step in that journey of change.
And the reason that's important is because that's how you make change sustainable in this context. So we are at the end. What have we just told you about? What do we think that you might be able to learn from our experience, and what would we love to hear your questions and thoughts on? this is what we're about to go through is what we learned about creating an environment for change. It was our work with one team who weren't a software team, but we think it does still apply to software teams because software teams are made of people too. And we moved from doing things to the team to empowering them to do these things for themselves. And now the business owner in the team and I, and not Arif because he left, we are sharing our story at Cancer Research UK and making it part of this bigger picture of the digital transformation journey that we are on. So, I know, and I said all three words that are terrible, so there we go. So, number one,
so set expectations, be open, transparent, and explicit from the outset. I think it's really important. I don't know if to say we missed a trick there, but I think just reinforce it from the beginning of how we went through this journey and noting how the business owner felt through some of the experience. So very clearly, so I think the other side of it is what we were just saying earlier is understand where they are now and appreciate that and have empathy for that and use that to have a springboard to making that change. Because if you go in with your perceptions, your assumptions, but aren't open and honest about why you're doing it and what you're doing, you're obviously going to create some friction.
Number two, trust must be cultivated, and there are lots of ways to do that, and we've only just talked about a handful of them.
We talked about that just now, Kaizen over Kaik. So this whole experience is around that evolutionary change. We're not trying to do things revolutionary. We weren't in a position to do that. We were making the changes at the right time. It was paced at their level of maturity. And I think that's really important to be aware of.
Have empathy, listen to everyone in the team and understand their context and who they are and why they are who they are and why they're being how they are.
Yep. And the last one, outcome-focused objectives crucial for team alignment. Again, we just talked about that earlier on. It really helps to create focus in the team and create that engagement. Again, we're all going back to some of the same stuff around trust, psychological safety, etc., etc. So, yeah. And then the last thing.
The last bonus learning.
Bonus.
It's really hard.
It is hard, yeah.
So, it's hard for them and it's hard for us.
So it's tough. That's why. No, I didn't. That wasn't right.
Thank you very much.
That's it. Thank you. Any questions?
Oh.
Few. Gentleman first.
Question, so you said you were using the hub and spoke.
Yeah.
The team that you formed, it sounded like they were coming together quite well. At the end of the project, did they go back into the hub and break down?
Good question.
So at the end of the project, the people that originally came from the hub, they go back to the hub and then they go and join another spoke. And then the people that were not from the hub originally, they stay in their normal team, but they've got like really strong relationships and links back to the hub. So when they need support with something in particular, that's there.
You might have lost some of that team building.
Yeah. So like that's.
And that is a I guess a potential downside. But I guess what we also were trying to do was with that the core business team that were coming in is make them a bit more self-sufficient so they can sustain their ways of working sustain the ways of working that we had embedded with them. So that's the other intention with the model.
It also doesn't just stop.
No.
Like it's you don't just like now it's Friday and it's the end and we'll see you never again. it's a more gradual pulling apart, and because you're sharing skills across that time period, a lot of the sort of hub people start to fall away because they don't need to be there anymore because the people from that team have those skills. So, and they're still there and they're still around and it's like safe and it's fine, but they don't depend on them anymore. And we certainly, the beginning was the focus on building a whole team together, and then towards the end the focus is on making sure that the team, the smaller team, the core team are going to be okay. Hello.
You talked about a 4-month time scale.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah, more or less.
Does that mean that you were in there 4 months? The project was basically a 4-month project, and how much resource did you put into it? Were you dipping in and out, or were you in there with it the whole duration of the 4 months?
So that actually really depends from spoke to spoke, and the team that we were working with had been working together on this for some time, so like I guess a lot of like people and time had gone into it. In terms of how it works for us, I'm normally running 2 spokes at once, you'd probably be on more.
Yeah, but I felt we were more or less full time on it.
Yeah.
Especially.
You were full time on this, the amount that you put in.
That's right. That's it. Yeah. It was.
It feels like it.
Feels it was. Yeah.
So it's really intense.
Yeah.
Like it's really full on, and you really get to know them very well. And like I go and sit with them, and create that new space. So yeah.
Just a little quick question.
Sure.
The driver for you going in there, was it perceived that project was failing?
No, not at all. They asked for it.
Okay.
So that's how it works at the moment. People request support from the technology team, and then we talk about like what sort of support they need and the best way to give it to them. Which is why that point about managing expectations is so interesting, because they wanted a spoke and they wanted to work with us. So no, it's nothing at all like that. And the project wasn't. I feel like I have to say that the project wasn't failing. Everything was good.
It's good.
Yeah.
I think the lady here was.
Hello.
Thank you, that was great. There's loads of information in there, so thank you.
Thank you.
My question was sort of around how your organisation has kind of sponsored you to do this in the first place, because you sort of work a lot in the NHS, so from being in that kind of environment, knowing that the focus is very, very much on delivery, can resonate with some things you were saying about earlier on about sort of actually probably maybe when those teams were coming to you initially, it was very much because they want you to go in and support them to deliver and get on with delivery and do that quickly, and you're saying actually no, we're not just going to deliver this for you, with you, we're going to give you the skills so that you can deliver it yourself and continue to keep on delivering it for yourself. Did you have support within the organisation that was essentially commissioning your team to do that, and or how does that work in terms of saying actually no, part of our remit is learning and teaching you how to do it, so that when you're getting that challenge back, there's that sort of support within the senior levels?
Yeah, so that's really hard, and it's there in some places, but it's not there everywhere. That's why setting things like a vision and your outcomes are really important at the beginning, because part of our outcomes was the sharing skills and leaving you in a place where you'd learnt things. But
I suppose the other, from the lady's point, your role as proposition manager is part of that, isn't it? And and Julia, who runs the team, that's the remit of that team, is to go out and do that quite deliberately in this spoke model. So but it doesn't mean that there's natural buy-in. That's what we're, I think, trying to show.
It definitely doesn't mean that everybody gets it. So you have to do a lot up front to try and explain that. But I do have. The technology team is committed to this program of change, so I've got that support on that side.
The learning approach rather than just
from the digital side, yes. Isn't it? I think that's fair to say.
Yeah. So we've got, and I think that's pretty important to have that backing. But then when you go out there into the charity where that isn't necessarily there yet, it's also part of my job to change that in the senior people around that space.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Sure.
One of the biggest challenges I have experienced in the teams I have had so far is the psychological safety issue. How long did it take you to build psychological safety where teams can open up, discuss issues in an open, collaborative environment and trust each other without fear of, I don't know.
I think that's a hard question to answer. So the variable. Sorry.
I have always struggled with this.
Yeah.
It's the biggest problem I have experienced with the teams I've been working with.
Yeah, sure. So the challenge here is, the variable here is people. People are. So sorry, I know it sounds a bit, but we're dealing. People are. So we talk about complexity theory. We use that in a way. Humans are complex organisms themselves. So to get there. To get alignment across a group of complex beings, to work in that way, it's tough and it's hard. What we've tried to showcase here is some approaches, tools and techniques that you may want to try. But I would say, yes, it requires effort, it requires consistent effort, it requires a regularity, consistency and high frequency. I think that's what we're trying to show here, that it wasn't something that we just did to a team, left them, and then came back after a while. We were constantly with them, constantly observing, we were inspecting, adapting, we were reviewing what was working, we were changing. So one of the things we didn't say, but when it came to retrospectives, how we were doing that, it wasn't because, right, I'm going to try a new fancy retrospective today. No, it was Connie came to me and would come to me sometimes and say, right, Arif, this sprint, what we've seen is X, Y, Z behaviour. Because I wasn't always there every stand-up, and Connie would be more in the coalface. So it'd be like, well, Arif, I've seen X, Y, and Z behaviour. I think this is the areas that we need to address. How can we tackle it? And we design the retrospectives in a way to tackle those particular problems, which is what we were saying, like the 5 dysfunctions exercise. That was deliberate. That was very deliberate because we had particular challenges we were seeing. So you have to apply yourself to this, and you have to be consistent in your approach, and you have to inspect. So try something, see what's not working, get the feedback, come back and change it. You have to do the same thing you're telling the people to do. If you want people to inspect that, you have to do the same thing as well as a change agent. I think that's really important. Exactly.
People to just
Change, yeah.
And don't be really hard on yourself,
Yeah.
because it's not black and white.
No.
And like, it's not that there isn't psychological safety and then there is.
Yeah.
There's like a million stages in between. So for your own sake, when you have that little win, when you have something, you need to like hold on to that and remember that, and that's something that you can build on, because otherwise you're going to go mad.
I think one thing just maybe might be helpful to say. So if you can use this in your, maybe think about using this in where you are and look at where the team is. They're on a continuum. This isn't a sequential curve. It's not that after we do this, then we go to the, no, it can be something that, depending on the environment, you may regress. So you could think you're in a norming phase, something happens in the team members change, new direction comes in, we go back to storming. So it's important to recognize where you are, and again, use that model as well as a tool to recognize what's happening in the team, observe what's happening, and then use that to affect the right changes, if that helps. Any other question? One lady at the back was first. Moo lady.
Yeah, talking about one of the challenges you faced that the team came to the point where the team had loads of staff with progress, tickets came into the background constant. Might not be so much of a project kind of environment, but from a day-to-day perspective, for example, if the business grows in all sort of areas, and then like more dependencies on, let's say, on that one engineering team because they are responsible for that, and it just comes in, then it's not just. Is there any point where do you have any tips on how to deal with the fact that I can only do so much as in when there's a dysfunction within my team or the behavior, but that is not necessarily within their influence whatsoever, that the tickets just come in and the request of the work, that's not them dysfunctioning, that's just the amount literally, like at what point did you have to go, like for example, to say to the business, you know what, this is enough?
Yeah.
Like the team is just maxed and there's no way? Or like how would you deal with those kind of situations?
I think some of what we tried to touch on was reflect the system back on itself. So observe what's happening, which you're obviously doing. Gather the data and the information around the impacts of that behavior. So and you could do it on 2 stages perhaps. Go back to the team and say, this is what's currently happening and this is the impact of it. What can we do to change that? So there may be some things in the system you can change. You could try to limit the amount of work coming in through some processes, if that's possible, perhaps. Beyond that, you can then also take that and go back to the people or the route of where that work is coming in, and again reflect back to them and say, look, as a result of this X amount of work coming in, it has resulted in X, Y, Z challenges. So, no work is coming out the door, or the team morale is dropping, or people are leaving. These are the kind of impacts of that behavior. How do you think we can work together and help each other to stop that from happening? Because, that may be a tactic to try. I think the first thing is obviously to try and understand why that's happening. I'm sure you're going to be doing that, or you're trying to do that. We talked about empathy. We talked about understanding their position. There could be some reasons. Understand, acknowledge that, and then take back the feedback of what you're seeing and the impacts of that, and then try to have a conversation without knowing more of the context. I don't think it's much more I could say, but generally
the
speaking.
only other thing I'd say is that it is okay to let things fail sometimes, and sometimes things have to fail for people to realise that something needs to change. I thought there's like pizza. Shall we chat like after?
Do you have an answer?
Yeah. You talked about managing stakeholder and outcome. So how did you reconcile both, especially when the outcome was slow? How did you manage to sway them that it was a normal process?
You can answer that.
It's a lot about being available, having conversations, trying to create empathy with those people. That's what we did.
Repetition.
Yeah.
So a lot of this we have to repeat. So you say it in one way, yeah, get it, out the ear. You see the impact of the behaviour. You have to go back again. We agreed this and we discussed this, and this is so there's an element of repetition there, saying the same thing in different ways. It's hard, I guess. It's tough. There's no silver bullet. That's one thing.
It was never like when we go into spokes, the objectives that we take on from the team are never my objective to own. It's the team's. It's always the team's objective, and it would be disempowering if it became my thing and I was the person that managed this, and now I was the one that was going to make it happen. So there's also something there about supporting the person who it is that you're coaching and that you're trying to support, so that they have a safe space with you, and then have the sort of the strength that they need to be able to go out there either with you or without you, whatever they need and prefer, to like go and have those difficult conversations.
Yeah.
But they are probably always just going to be difficult conversations.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Do we have?
The models they used, did you share that with the stakeholders in the business, saying that actually these are the things that we're trying with the team, so they were understood the process?
As an example.
As in, you mentioned documents kind of
Yeah.
process.
Yeah.
The diverge, converge, those ones.
Yeah.
Did you share that with the
Not all of them. I guess some of them were implicit. So like when we were designing and running the workshops, that was implicit. We weren't explicitly saying, guys, we've done this using games. Oh, I see.
We're doing it
point.
now. We didn't do it so much in the beginning and in the spoke itself, because then our focus was on the team and not making them feel like weird, got at, exposed, whatever. It was about focusing on those guys. And now what we've got to is a position where me and the business owner and team members are going out and talking about our story, depending on the audience, like mixed level of detail that you'd go to. Like I probably wouldn't tell a director about like a specific, like, you know, delegation poker, for example. But yes, we are playing that out and telling that story to the business so that people can start to understand. It's like a real life example of this stuff and how it works and what it looks like, and it's a good thing to do.